The next session is the operator excitement. This is a panel discussion. Please allow me to invite Mr. Amit Marwah, CMO, Nokia. Please. Yeah, but Mr. Rahul Vatts, Vodafone-Idea. Mr. Arvind Bali, TSSC, sir, please आइए. ये कौन है भाई? Mr. Vipin Tyagi. And lastly, Mr. Sukanta. This session will be moderated by Mr. Sukanta. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning once again. I have a very distinguished set of panelists and experts, and the good part is they are from different facets of the industry. So we will have exciting, the topic is also on operator excitement, an exciting discussion on 5G. So I'd like to go in straight into it and open with Mr. Amit Marwah of Nokia, who can please tell us his views on the road to 5G. The morning session has been very exciting, especially the previous panel. I was just sharing it with Pradeep that it was really exciting to know so many things, and also exciting to know that the people in the government feel positive about 5G, because everybody's kind of thinking the same story, that why 5G when we haven't even rolled out 4G properly in most parts of the country. In some parts, we don't even have 3G if you took rural areas, and et cetera, et cetera. So you know all that. So why are we talking about 5G at all? But the significant thing is that India is the #1 country in software, and most of 5G is software amongst other technologies, which I discussed early in the morning. And how do we take advantage of that, and how do we actually gain leadership of 5G ahead of China and the US, who are kind of taking 5G very, very seriously and investing a lot of time, energy, management, and resources in it. So, Mr. Marwah, sir.
Thank you, sir. Just to put it into perspective, similar discussions we've been having 1 year back, 2 years back, and we were all talking about 5G and when it is going to happen. The fact today is that 5G has already happened. There are a large number of operators in some of the markets who have actually gone commercial with 5G today. So it's not a myth anymore, it's a reality first. US, all operators have adopted and are rolling out 5G in a large way. Japan, Korea, Australia, some part of Europe, and even some countries in the Middle East. The happening of 5G is already taking place as we speak right now. 5G is a technology which I say is, generally we say technology evolution. In case of 5G, I would call it as a revolution. And why the revolution? Because it's a disruption in some sense, that it takes the mobile connectivity to a completely different level. Level meaning that it touches not only your connectivity which you get from your phones and from your laptops and whatever you do through the net, but takes it beyond that, touching every part of the society. So it's a societal change which is envisaged in terms of how 5G is going to have an impact on the overall ecosystem and the economies in the future. Having said that, all this is not going to happen. So, it's like a few years back, we used to talk about smart cities. And when we started talking about smart cities in India or anywhere else in the world, the perception was that there'll be a smart city and everything will change. And I think that's the kind of perception which is also building for 5G, that 5G will come and then everything will change drastically and very fast. So that's not going to happen. So it's a phased evolution. There are three broad categories of 5G, as we have seen. Ultra broadband, massive machine-to-machine, and ultra-low latency. Now, all of them have different types of use cases associated with them. And all these things are going to evolve in the path to 5G. So ultra latency, which is connected cars, might be a good use case for a market like US, and remote surgeries might be a very good use case for a very mature market, but may not be a use case for India. For India, use case like even getting fixed mobile connectivity in your houses through a wireless connection where fiber is an issue, and using 5G as a backhaul is a huge potential. Similarly, use cases around making cities smarter, making water leakage happen less, making agriculture smarter, making virtual classrooms, giving education, giving remote medicine, and having assisted cars. I'm not saying connected cars, assisted cars where you have small devices which basically when the car feels that it's going to have a collision or something, it just alerts you, or it brakes on its own. So these are small things. You don't have to have a driverless car going straight. So it's an evolution which will happen. And I think the other aspect which I want to touch upon is that we keep debating this thing that is it okay for, or is it the right time for India to have 5G? If we keep debating this, I think we will keep struggling and finding excuses for ourselves not to do 5G. But the fact is that today in this connected world, in this world where the consumers are so savvy and so understand technology, it is not going to be easy to keep the consumer deprived of any new technology which comes in the future by delaying 5G. So it should happen as soon as possible in the Indian environment.
I think very good opening comments, and I fully agree that the use case for India will be completely different. It has to do with our own social milieu, the challenges which we are facing in our small towns, rural areas particularly, and basic things like, as he said, assisted cars and agriculture and so on and so forth. And the most important thing I think he said was, is it the right time? Of course it's the right time. And I would like to request my dear friend Rahul, whom I worked with earlier in my earlier company, Idea. Vodafone is a leader in 5G. So request your views on it.
Thank you, Sukanta. And thank you, Voice&Data, for this invite. I think we have a very good and energetic discussion since morning on the 5G and how we are seeing it to evolve. Just to give you a sense that the Prime Minister has committed $5 trillion economy, and as a digital economy, the contribution is expected to be around 1 trillion out of that. Now, how do we reach there? So we have today around 500 million people who are, connected through data, and we are looking at this number going up to 850 million and up to 900 million. And the time for us is another 3 years, 4 years, 5 years to be able to reach there. And what do we see when we reach there? Are there use cases which are going to, help us out? Absolutely, as Amit just pointed out, there are applications in agriculture, in healthcare, in various form of technologies. Basically, converting the connected layer we see today, converting into a platform for digital platform for the society. So that's what the 5G is going to help us to be able to reach there. As far as we are concerned, Vodafone is a world leader in IoT and IoT space. We operate in around 70 countries, and we have already taken lead in rolling out 5G. We have had trials in Nokia, in Italy. We have had some trials in Spain. And so already we have taken the very first steps of reaching there. And how good are we in Vodafone-Idea right now? So we have already started the first baby steps towards 5G. We already have nearly 80 to 90% of TDD radios which are already ready to be used for 5G. We are converting our transport layers and our core layers to be ready for 5G. So in terms of having the capability to be able to reach there, I think we are all out there. The only thing which is still to be tested out is various use cases, and we have been struggling with the government to, get over to this point about doing actual tests for the use cases which we want to do. So that's where we are. So we are pretty much charged up about 5G. There are issues which, as we go along, we'll try to highlight.
Rahul, thanks a lot. Yeah. I think Vodafone is, as you know, the world leader in 5G. In many countries, they've already rolled out in several countries I'm aware of, as Rahul was explaining. And it's good to hear that nearly 80% of your radio network is enabled for 5G. That's really good news. I didn't know that. And may I request Mr. Bali to say his views on 5G, please?
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Day. Thanks, Voice&Data, Mr. Gupta, for inviting me for this panel discussion. Always, I'm very happy to be among my telecom fraternity. As far as telecom is concerned, this is one area, telecom and IT, these are the two spaces which has actually made all Indian proud. When we compare ourselves with the rest of the world, I think telecom is an area where we are almost matching best of the world. Like if the world is on 4G, we are on 4G. When the world is moving to 5G, we are already talking about 5G. So that is an area, where we are going to be catching up, or we'll be actually at par with most of the developed world and much ahead of many other places. But it's not only 5G per se as a telecom system we are talking. I think it is a complete ecosystem we are talking. Like as a 5G technology country, we'll not only be providing 5G services to this nation, I think we'll also be providing a lot of services to the world over. There are a lot of companies from India who are providing managed services and other services from engineers and technicians who are based out of India. So this is also something which will be a great area where we'll be seeing a good growth in coming times. So one question basically which everybody asks, like if we are already having 4G, we are already talking about 40, 50, 100 Mbps speeds, that is good enough. In the just few years back, we were very happy with even 2 or 4 Mbps. Why and what is the need of spending so much of money? Why we are moving to 5G? So just to tell you, I was in MWC Shanghai just in the month of June. The world is changing so fast. Rather, we go to exhibitions every year, and every year we see that there is a dramatic change from what we saw last time. Anything and everything what is happening around us today, or whatsoever technological changes what is happening around us today, are to make our life easy and comfortable. Whatsoever is happening, to make our health better, to make our entertainment better, to make our living better. Now, if we have to do that, there is a technology evolution which is taking place, and that technology can be deployed only when we have high-speed network. The new areas where the work is happening, be it on IoT, AR, VR, any technology which is coming, I think there are two basic requirements. It should be able to carry a lot of bandwidth, a lot of data. Second, it should be able to carry it at a very high speed, and also the latency has to be in milliseconds. So if that is the things which we have to achieve, we have to have 5G. If we don't have 5G at par with the world, I think the rest of the technology will not be at par with the world. So that is the reason, like as a country, we have to have 5G almost at the time when the world is going to have it. Just to give you like few examples, there are certain things which in the past was very, very difficult, very, very tough to do, and a lot of accidents used to happen. Just to give an example, all these high power wires, tension wires, which carries high voltage current, like normally it gets heated up, it gets snapped, then you have power outage and all that stuff. Now, earlier, to check that, there used to be very difficult technologies, but now, like drones are being used, like you can just move the drone over the wires and see if there are some hot spots and then attend to it. Same way, like railways, we are talking about high-speed railways moving into the country. Now, on the rail lines, if there are cracks or something, earlier there was very manual work. There used to be a gang which used to move before the train and just see if there are any loose connections or any cracks, etc. But now all that can be done by drones. And all these activities can happen only when you have this 5G kind of bandwidths, 5G kind of latencies, and 5G kind of things. So I'm very sure as operators, they must be very excited because application and usages are very high, and everywhere there will be a big need of going for high-speed internet with least latencies.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bali. I think Mr. Bali brought out a very interesting point. India is known for exporting software, and we have the world's best software engineers all over the world, including India. And hence we export a lot of sort of back-end operations and research of very large companies are based in India. Everybody knows that, based in Bangalore, Hyderabad, and everywhere. So I think it brought out a very interesting point that once 5G rolls out, and because of the huge talented manpower we have in telecommunication and software engineers, there could be export of managed services of 5G to the rest of the world from India. I think that opens up a huge new vista of employment and employment generation and skilling, etc. I think that's a very interesting point, a very, very interesting point. And the second point, which was also very interesting, is that our latency in 4G is about 70 milliseconds, something like that. Actually more, because a lot of places we don't have 4G. But in the case of 5G, it will be less than a millisecond. And that really changes the user experience. And as alluded earlier, that certain industries like robotic surgery, etc., all that requires very low levels of almost zero latency, will obviously thrive on the 5G environment. May I request Mr. Tyagi to say his views on 5G, please?
Good afternoon. Thanks to Pradeep ji and Voice and Data committed team and persuading me to be here on time. I have 5 things that I'm going to talk about 5G evolution. First of all, every technology goes from phase to phase. We are in the high phase, and now we are entering the performance phase. And high phase is where everybody dreams about it, and people see the possibilities, but they don't know really how much time it will take and what will happen in terms of real progress. So one realization which is there is that 5G is now getting into performance phase, where they will start delivering things. The trials are happening all over. The core network standards are yet to be frozen. What has been frozen is that how we'll migrate from 4G to 5G, standalone and non-standalone mode. It means 4G and 5G will coexist together. So consequently, this phase is a very important phase for everybody to capitalize on the changes that are happening. So the mantra that I have learned about how 5G will be actually panning out is caring, sharing, changing, and growing are the important thing for any player who want to participate in this particular journey of 5G. And this employs to the organization themselves. So we have to learn to care at the speed of 5G. It means that more and more critical applications are going to be there on top of the 5G that we are proposing. How are we going to care for the end users, customers, and the solutions which are going to be there? Second one is sharing, is that all infrastructure, unless we share, and the initial costs are always higher, but however much you try, either by the way of the pricing itself being higher, or in terms of having to do 2 or 3 rounds of understanding and learning. Consequently, sharing of the core network, which is now no longer, the network is optical fiber, the cores and the access, and it has got the slicing that you can do. And it is graceful sharing of the infrastructure is very much possibility using the 5G, which probably was not that graceful in 4G or before. So sharing is going to be determining the pricing and the collaboration across. The changing part is very interesting, and then this is what I want to really spend 1 or 2 sentences and a minute on that, is that telecommunication should no longer remain telecommunication. And what it means is that we are now part of the other sector's enabler. You know, people come and do housekeeping in your organization, it runs. People come and do the, computers in your organization, it runs. There are sector-specific challenges which are being talked about at this point in time. I have gone to some places where they had nothing to do with the 5G. They were the scientific community, and they were talking about when 5G comes, what will happen to the biology, basic. So the core issue that I'm trying to say, we have to now, telecommunication has to become enabler. So they have to get hooked onto these particular sectors, right? Then we will be able to provide very effective services. Some example of that will be there in entertainment, public, all of that is being talked about right now. But serious business and serious dollars will come from the people who really want to differentiate themselves, want to create productivity, want to create unprecedented possibilities beyond the normal services that we have witnessed so far. Growing is very important. If you don't grow, in the sense that the engagement process that we have seen in telecommunications, which are at arm's length, it has to be at the corporate level, that give me all your branches all across the country, and I'll deliver you this quality of service, and these services will be guaranteedly enabled in that. And I will set my network to service you and to your satisfaction, and there will be a concierge available to you to ensure that all quality of service parameters are published and available to you on a dashboard. That is the engagement process for solving problem is very, very important in terms of growing the business. Then you have the engagement with the large corporates, with the people in different segments, and then that's how you bring about that. Okay. Next thing is that rather than redefining the customer experience, we have to redefine the customers themselves. Okay, and that's what is very important, that now customer definition has to undergo a change. Okay, it's not voice, it is not data. It is also not experience. It is the participation in the change process of the economy. And now that brings me to the last point that I wanted to make, that 5 trillion economy, dream, and path to 5G, how they are related. Why this 5G has come, first of all, before completing the 4G journey, there are many reasons for it. One is that 4G patents are getting expiring, and 3G patents are expiring. So unless we redo the whole IPR game, changes. So that's why it is important for us to understand that how this equation is not that if you have the more penetration of broadband, then automatically economy will grow. What we have to see is what things will happen with 5G coming in. What more economic activity will get generated, how our exports will become more and more competitive, how our manufacturing will become more and more competitive, how we will increase our share of the consumption and domestically, how is that the more jobs will get created, how is that the paradigm shift will happen for pharmaceutical industry. Unless we are able to define that sitting together, this 5G and 5 trillion economy will not coexist, and the spectrum and the resources and the fiber, all of that, and the changing core, all of those are going to be replaced for promise, whatever we are going to promise. Consequently, it is very important for all of us to understand the 5 trillion economy path through 5G need to be actually thought through. Then everything will come online. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Tyagi. I think you made a very important point that 5G is not actually telecommunication, but it's a basic layer of doing any business or any social activity. Just like if you actually seriously look at Facebook is telecommunication. If you look at Google, it's mostly telecommunication. So 5G is something like that. It's something where beyond it will be part of the basic layer of doing any business. It will be sector agnostic, and it will have to grow continuously to keep pace with the changing needs and times, and do basic things like generate employment and lead us to the $5 trillion economy. So I think the opening comments of all the panelists are over, and now I'd like to go to three basic questions which have been asked by the organizers to discuss in this meeting, in this panel. One is, why will Spectrum, talk about these three questions immediately, and then the panel members can, and the audience can also give their views. Why will spectrum acquisition be key for 5G rollout in India? And here, the reason I'm also bringing out this topic is Mr. Tyagi said a very important thing, that we must learn to share. After care, he said share. Because spectrum is very expensive, so are the radio infrastructures as well as fiber and everything. Unless everybody in the system learns to share, and the regulation, and the regulatory enabling is there for sharing spectrum, sharing all active services, I don't think we'll be able to fast track 5G. So one point is that, and the second point is how will operators address consistency issues such as networks and handsets, compatibility issues? We had a 1G handset, and now are we going to have 5G handsets, and the whole game will start again. All the handset manufacturers will start doing various things, network equipment, etc. The whole chain has to be compatible from end to end, otherwise it will not work. And how will 5G usher in a plethora of disruptive changes? So these are the three kind of topics which I would request Mr. Marwah to give some views on it. Thank you.
So should I give all of them, or we do one? Okay. So on the spectrum, my view is that there are important things that need to be considered when it comes to allocation of 5G spectrum. Number one, it is very important that the spectrum needs to be harmonized with the world. Because this is the problem or the mistake which happened in 4G, where the world was to a large extent divided in terms of FD, TD, which band, how much spectrum, somebody adopting something, somebody adopting the same spectrum for something else, and it created a huge chaos in terms of having the ecosystem develop very fast. So the most important thing is for India or any other market to look at harmonized spectrum which is getting adopted across the world and adopt. I think the first step on that has already been made by TRAI by announcing the 3.4, 3.7 gigahertz spectrum, which is a harmonized spectrum in order to get the value of the global ecosystem that gets developed. The other thing we have to be careful with regard to spectrum or any other thing is that we should not reinvent something of our own here, because then we will fall into the bucket where India is doing India-specific things, and I think we need to be careful about that. The second thing on spectrum is that it should be enough spectrum, and I think Jitu covered on that. 100 megahertz in the mid-band, sufficient in the low band, and large quantity in the high band. And that is what in the future, it doesn't have to happen the next year when the auction happens, but there should be a roadmap of giving spectrum in all these three bands in order to make the full use of 5G. And the last thing I would say is that on the spectrum is the pricing, but I'm not the right person to comment on the pricing, but yes, the spectrum pricing of 5G, in my view, should be looked very different from the way the auctions have happened in the past, because the earlier auctions were about a certain technology giving a certain value. 5G is creating additional value in a lot of other things, so basically you need to look at it in a different way. Of course, whatever the government decides on that. In terms of consistency between networks and devices, I think we have a great opportunity sitting in front of us by way of now the government saying that let's start doing trials. And an opportunity for the CSPs, for us as OEMs, for the whole ecosystem to be able to use this opportunity to try to thrash out all the issues which result in the network interworking, 2G, 3G, 4G interworking with 5G, or devices interworking, and try to resolve those from an India-specific perspective. So I think that is something that is important. And of course, I think I really like the way Arunaji put it as, she said 5G is a general purpose technology. So when it becomes a general purpose technology, I think what disruptive changes it can bring are unlimited, absolutely. And like I said before also, 5G is going to touch industries, it is going to touch medical, it is going to touch logistics, it is going to touch agriculture. So it is going beyond a certain connectivity to a large part of the entire ecosystem. And I think the bigger challenge in that and the opportunity also is for the entire ecosystem to work together, which means ecosystem partners to work together, various government machineries to work together. The operators have an opportunity to become from a CSP to what we call a digital service provider. So they need to look at this as a huge opportunity. One example I was reading the other day was, we have I think our student to teacher ratio average is about 60:1. Now imagine if this kind of student to teacher ratio we have, we cannot provide education. But 5G can provide virtual learning in a very easy way, where you could get into remote classrooms and extend that education. Similarly, our doctors, I believe we have about 150 lakh doctors less in the country. An average ambulance in India takes 13 times more time to reach than it takes a city like Finland or any of the developed European markets. So can we do virtual medicine or do remote healthcare, which can save lives? So these are the things that 5G will bring as a disruption, as an opportunity for the whole ecosystem to take. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent examples, Ms. Marwah. Rahul, I would request you to touch on how can operators and how can everybody share basic things like spectrum, which is so expensive? Is there a regulatory way to, can regulation take a lead, or can we convince regulators that we have to, at the end of the day, start sharing all the active infrastructure, otherwise we won't be able to fast track?
Yeah, sure. But before I do that, Sukanta, let me just try to answer the first three questions of yours, because they are very, very fundamental questions, which actually summarize the question as to why we are not having 5G right now, or what is the time delay for 5G, or how soon are we going to go to 5G. Those three questions actually summarize that point. So let me start from the reverse manner. Let's talk of disruption first. So I think a very important slide which Jitendra covered is the Ericsson study which he was sharing. And it was showing the number of likely customers you're going to see on 5G over the next 3-4 years. Our own estimates worldwide, which we have, suggest that by around 2024, we are going to have less than 15% people actually on 5G devices. And even the technology path right now is focusing on the non-standalone mode, because right now the percolation of 4G is the first primary task in front of the operators. You have got a spectrum which you have taken, huge quantities of spectrum, and you have not fully utilized your 4G. If I take up all the three operators right now, the bigger operators, generally all of them are more than 80% above in 4G coverage, but not entirely covered. So the first challenge for the operators is to do the 4G. So that's why I think the disruption is a little bit far away from us. Theoretically, yes, definitely is going to completely change our business systems. The way we look at our business currently is going to undergo a change. But disruption, yes, a little far away. Let me come back to the first point now. The spectrum part, which is the most critical point which we are facing right now. See, the problem with the spectrum which the government is giving is, A, the price. So let me tell you, Germany auctioned 5G spectrum, 3.3, 3.6 gigahertz, around 3 months back, and they sold the quantity of spectrum for 1 billion per megahertz. In India, the TRAI has priced the spectrum at 5 billion rupees per megahertz pan-India. The total premium given on spectrum in India is 455% over Germany. Germany has got 40% more revenues than India combined has got. So in such a situation where the spectrum is being priced 5 times over, where I've got half the revenues of a country like Germany, it's absolutely not going to work out for the operators. In fact, the back reference from DOT to TRAI mentioned that the operators in general are under a financial distress. There is a definite need to relook at the prices. If the prices remain like this, we are going to have a rerun of what happened in 2016. That is, the 700 megahertz was not touched by any operator. So this is the first fundamental problem which we are facing in terms of pricing. The second problem is the quantity of spectrum, which was mentioned, covered by some operators. So we had 300 megahertz in 3.3 megahertz, 3.3 gigahertz, which are now down to 175. And not only that, there is no path right now which we are seeing on 26 band or 28 band, and 40 absolutely not, which leaves only with the 700 megahertz, which is just too costly for operators to touch. So adequate quantity is the second thing which remains unaddressed as far as the operator community is concerned. The third aspect is the way the spectrum is going to be sold. which is a fundamental aspect. Right now, there is a cap of 50% in some gigahertz band, and it is our thinking that when the cap was first put in the market, there were at least 5 or 6 operators operating in the market. But with the operator structure now going down to just 3 or 4, definitely there is a need now to look at the cap afresh and ensure that at least 35% spectrum in each band is reserved for operators. Otherwise, you're going to have a monopolization of band by a particular operator or 2 set of operators. So that's the third aspect on the spectrum part which is concerned. Now let me come to the other part about the consistency of the networks, which I think Amit covered very nicely, which was the point that we will be able to do this only if we are able to be given spectrum which we can test out for our commercial use cases. Currently, for last 1 year, since IMC 2018, we have been in throes of a discussion with the department for a test spectrum. There was a format, we submitted the format, they said it's a new format, we submitted a new format, there's a third format, submitted a third format. Right? But right now, we are going to be in IMC 2019, but there is a definite problem because we still don't have a roadmap of when the actual spectrum would come to us for testing, and that is very, very important for us to be able to map the use cases, to be able to use it, and then check the consistency of the networks. In terms of readiness of network, we are a little more confident because the way the standardization is happening, the specs are happening, we are going to migrate from 4G to 5G. So we are a little more confident on that aspect, but yes, test cases are required. Now let me just address the last part of the problem, which you talked about, the sharing of spectrum. So sharing of spectrum has been permitted by the government since 2015. The basic problems which are there in sharing of spectrum are multiple. The first bigger problem in sharing of spectrum is that the moment I share the spectrum, I end up paying a 0.5% extra charges for sharing the spectrum, which is a big, in the current environment, it's a lot of money for us to be able to share that kind of spectrum. Secondly, the other problem which comes is that the moment you try to share the spectrum, that spectrum, 50% of it gets added up into your own spectrum pool, and so you are generally standing near a pool of violating the cap norms. So right, so the cap thing is the other problem which you immediately start facing. The third thing is that there is no incentive for the operators to be able to share spectrum and try to do something useful. Is there any incentive for me to do that today? The answer is no. There is an incentive for me when I share the tower, right? Immediately I get an incentive because my costs are completely shared. But that cost advantage is not translating when I'm trying to share the spectrum. So that is the thing on the spectrum.
Thank you. Mr. Bali, sir, your views on that.
Yeah, first of all, Rahul, my compliments. I think you covered this regulatory part very, very well. I think very comprehensively, explained everything. Now, like we talk about on spectrum part, ultimately, what we have seen in the past also, as the technology moved from say 2G to 3G, 3G to 4G, 4G to 5G, what happens when it moved from 3G to 4G? So there was already discussions were going on and technology was developing that 2G spectrum can be used for 4G. Same way, we'll be finding that ultimately, like spectrum will be technology agnostic, and it will be used for basically other things. From operator point of view, when they move to 5G, I think the biggest advantage of 5G is with the same spectrum, with the same bandwidth, everything remaining the same, you can probably transmit or you can generate almost 1,000 times more data, which practically means that it's the same thing which the unit rate comes down to by almost 100 or 500 times. So that is something which benefit will be coming. Now, as far as same argument goes for equipments, I remember when 4G technology was sold to various companies in the country as well as abroad, I think all these base stations and everything was upgradable to 5G. So normally it happens. Even handsets, like the handsets which are coming now, though 5G is not there, but new handsets are all 5G enabled. So when the 5G technology will come, I think all new handsets will be there. And as such, we are finding that lifespan of handset is very less. Most of the people change their handset within 2 to 3 times, and ultimately, like that will actually not be an issue. But one very, very relevant point, which is not probably in the questions which were raised, but I personally feel that every time when we are moving from 3G to 4G and now from 4G to 5G, country spends a lot of money in buying new equipment, buying new handsets, new technology, everything. So it is always good that at some stage, country has to take a call that we have to change our emphasis once again on local manufacturing. I think this is a thing which we should do because this is one industry where maximum imports are taking place, and if we have local manufacturing, I think it is going to make a very big difference. And also, I feel that as far as other issues are concerned, which will be taken care of if, one time we take this big plunge and big activity. So, summing up, that as far as these things related to spectrum, related to economics and related to ecosystem are concerned, I think these are things which will definitely industry will adopt and they will adjust to itself. As Rahul said, that definitely there are a few things which we should always look at. And today, telecom should not be taken or should not be, because if we do not develop telecom and we don't develop and we don't grow it at the same rate as the world is growing, we'll be left behind. In some of my other engagements, we talk about smart cities, we talk about IoTs, we talk about AR, VR, e-commerce, big data, all these things. But ultimately when I see, none of these are possible without having a great and good network with high bandwidths and least latencies. So ultimately, if we want to move with the world on all the new technologies, I think we should be focusing more on telecom.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bali. Mr. Tyagi, if you can now give your views, and I'd request you to talk a little bit on, see, as we see particularly in India, everything is moving on the mobile interface, everything. Whether you want to see a movie, whether you do your banking, you want to talk to somebody or send messages, you're basically using the camera to photograph documents, send it over WhatsApp, etc. You're using remote softwares to get, say, a rental agreement done in Bombay. You can sit in Delhi and do it. You don't have to go there, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of things are happening on the mobile interface, and you can do it, and you can do through the, is that working? You can do through the mobile interface. So everything is moving onto the handset primarily, which becomes the device of your doing, really moving your life. And somehow if that device is not connected to your 5G network or whatever network you have, you actually slow yourself down, you really run into problems. And this is the B2C part. And the B2B part, the machine-to-machine part, is even more critical with 5G, low latency and other things. So you will have it. Now also there's a consistency across countries. For example, let's say you're working with a company in the US or a company in Indonesia or Australia, and they're on 5G and you're here still on 4G. How does that consistency work out? Will you be able to send data across? Will you be able to do your conferencing properly, etc.? How does that compatibility work?
I think few very good questions. First of all, let me tell you that C-Dot built SG-RAN in 2012. What was this SG-RAN? Shared GSM radio access network. Our vision was 3 operators will come on a single infrastructure and they will share everything. Government also permitted that, but operator never looked inward, that where does it, is it a patented technology of C-Dot? Okay. So consequently, what was happening, we had all kind of permutation combination which was going on. Probably now is the time for us to look at graceful, secure, business-oriented sharing of the infrastructure, including radio, is need of the hour. You can trade almost everything. 1 single rupee worth of a stock, you can change, you can trade on a stock exchange for the duration of 1 minute. So what is so great about spectrum, shareability being a problem? We solve that problem, and humbly we submit that, please bring these problems. These are India-specific problems. We have more population density. We have variations which are very large in the demographics. Consequently, if we can define as to what is required, business requirement of India, we can build it here. So sharing, of a spectrum technically is desirable, possible, and will happen sooner or later. Whether we get it imported again or we get it done here, it is our choice. Second thing which is very important for all of us to understand was touched upon by Arvind ji, was that I actually believe that we need to have the India-specific standards or an India-specific design and manufacturing happening from here for the economic regions, for the regions of security, for the regions of control over the technology, for the regions of serving our masses at the lower cost, for solving problem in a different way, for differentiating India through the software. All of this is not possible. Unless we open up the bottle and see what is inside, you just can't do anything, right? You become a user. And as I said, with the changing environment, it is important that we get into that software piece ourselves and look at what we want to do. Consequently, it is important for us to really look at what we will do in 5G differently, and now is the time. In next 1 year, if we can define those problems, which are not only network problem, but are the problem over the layer above the network. Layer above the network, because network is going to be, more and more dumb, and the layers above are going to be more and more smarter. Now, then these all will be actually defining what is the success of the solutions that we give. And that's where we have to come together. TSDSI is a standard body where we can participate, we can think about it. Your differentiation has to come from the kind of customers that you're holding at this point in time. Second thing, bringing to your point, which you actually brought about, is the compatibility of the various standards and all that. Luckily, the standardization has already taken that into consideration. And I think Rahul Vatts talked about the standalone and non-standalone mode. And it means that they have thought through that initially it is going to be 4G network with the radio coming off the 5G with the spectrum availability, and that is how it is going to perform. Then eventually what will happen, the core will get into 5G and then they will start coexisting together. And when we are talking about that, today the standards, if we have followed them all the way, can take care of the old POTS phone and the latest 5G in the common infrastructure, right? Because there has been IMS, there was a telephony, so CDOT has already solved that problem of NGN, and we have the technology of complete NGN, we have the core technology for 4G. All of that is available. Now we will get into solving the 5G problems, and what we are looking at is that there is a perfect compatibility that exists. Everything will work. Now, what will change will be my 5G versus your 5G. That should not happen. The 5G should be the 5G, and consequently, the standardization efforts which are happening from India for the first time, where the TSDSI has proposed some changes to happen for the rural communication called LMLC. Now, that need to be decided and adopted if possible, so that rural India can have larger cells and still have 5G. Those are the kind of issues which we need to actually debate at this point in time, put that in the core of the technology. By the way, the core is going to be more and more open source softwares are available, but it will require still the engineers to work on that and adapt to the problems.
Thank you, Mr. Tyagi. We have a little time for a couple of questions from the audience. I think we've covered a wide range of topics in this session. So I'd welcome any questions which you may have.
By the time questions are coming, I think, I just want to, make one line that there are 3 trees which are being planted at the same time, and they will grow together. And these trees are IoT, right? That tree IoT is growing. Second one is 5G, and third one is Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is going to take they are taking about more than 50% of the data of the offloading is happening right now, and that will increase. And Wi-Fi is becoming about 10 gigabit per second per hotspot, and then 2.6 we have shown, and Wi-Fi 6 a few days back. So these 3 trees are going, and they will all feed into each other and serve to each other. They are not in that they are going to compete with each other. That's another thing I just wanted to kind of talk.
Yeah, so go ahead. You had a question.
So technology is fine, 5G, but then, as I understand this
So
is...
just announce your name and then...
Well, I am D. Banerjee from DCM Shriram.
Okay.
Now, adoption of new technology is fine, but then, as I understand, this has serious health concerns. The 5G as a technology doesn't emit signal or requires a lot of repeaters within a very short distance. Like when you want to spread it across a city, you require more transmitter compared to perhaps 4G or 3G. As per one who this thing, they said with this kind of technology, perhaps people will start aging faster. Then there are some carcinogenic effect of this technology on human this thing. So I want to understand from you people, have you evaluated this from human health issue point, or is it just mere technology that you are propagating? At the end of a day, it has to serve the humanity. So are we paying a heavy cost for going into this kind of a technology? Though it may be inevitable at this stage, as you are putting it, that 5G requires, for those medical issues and other things, you need to have a technology. So I want to know from...
Rahul, you can take it up. So before Rahul, you answered that question. So we have had mobile technology, if you've seen my presentation in the morning, from the 1980s to today. And there has been no, as of today, I'm not talking about 5G as we go, Rahul will answer that question. As of today, there has not been, this is about, let's say, 20 years of pretty intense usage of cellular technology across the world. So there has not been a direct correlation between, say, a cell tower close to your house and any health hazard. So far, there has not been. Maybe I don't know. So Rahul, you go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for your question, sir. So you see, the thing about 5G, and you have mentioned about the distance being small when the window is, so we have small cell technology is going to be there. But I want to first address you the fundamental point from a regulatory perspective, which the country took not today, but 10 years ago, which was that we adopted the ICNIP norms for radiation in our country. And not only that, we said we are going to be 1/10 of the international norms. So if international norm is 1, we are going to be 0.1, right? So whatever norms are, and by the way, ICNIP norms are formed after a lot of consultations, a lot of research, a lot of documentation and R&D adopted throughout the world by all the countries supported by WHO. So in India, in 2009, we said we are going to be always 1/10 of the ICNIP norms, right? Although it leads us to end up with more sites, more towers everywhere, but that's a fundamental call taken by the government long back. So I want to assure you first, that as far as this is concerned, we are always going to be at the lower end of the spectrum as far as this radiation part is concerned. Second part is, sir, even as we are rolling out 5G across the world, a lot of operators are doing it. It's already started in US, in Europe. Korea started, last year. There have been have been continuous studies which have been going on from both sides of the spectrum. There are people who say that there is, and there are people who say that there is not. So there are research funded actually from both ends of spectrum. But till today, as Sukanta mentioned, no conclusive research has proved anything as far as this is concerned. So I want to assure you that government has already taken a very positive step on this more than 10 years back. Want to add something?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add, because this is very funny. When 4G happened, we had exactly the same discussion, and I know we were in some panels in IIT Bombay, and exactly the same discussion was happening, and I'll tell you an incident around that. It was so funny, I was in one of those panels, and we were discussing exactly the same thing, that India has adopted 1/10 the international radiation norms. So we are much safer than, actually a handset has more radiation than what a network will be able to give to you, and that's true for 5G itself also. But the satire of that whole thing was that we were having this conference inside the auditorium, and we went outside, and there was this huge corridor like this, and there were stalls there. And I was very surprised, because after the panel we went out and there were these stalls there, and those stalls were, you know what they were selling? Some of them were selling lockets, which said that if you wear this locket, you will be radiation proof. They were selling stickers which you put on the laptop. They were selling films that you put on your glass and say that if you put in your house these films, you will be radiation free. So I'm just saying that it's misleading to a large extent, not scientifically proven. I know we all see these YouTube videos where crows are getting fried on 5G base stations, but none of that is true. US being one of the most stringent country in adopting any kind of, radiation norms, has already done a large-scale deployment of 5G.
Do we have time for one more question? No, I think we have already overshot. Thank you very much. I would like to hand you back to the organizer.
Thank you. May I now ask Mr. De to please hand over mementos to everyone? To Mr. Vipin Tyagi. Mr. Arvind Bali. Mr. Rahul Vatts. Mr. Amit Marwah. My pleasure to give a memento to Mr. Sukanta De. Sir, a group. Thank you.